Okay, so imagine this. You're at a market in Brazil about to buy some pão de queijo, and your money app just says denied.
Oh no.
And the reason? You've hit your government set cheese bread limit for the day.
Wow.
Sounds crazy, right? Like something straight out of Black Mirror.
Totally.
Well, this could actually become reality in Brazil with their proposed digital currency DRX. And that's exactly what we're diving into today.
Okay.
We've got this really insightful interview with Federal Deputy Júlia Zanatta, who's been leading the charge against DRX, and she's really highlighting what it could mean for individual freedom and privacy in Brazil.
I see.
This is about way more than just a new way to pay for things. Talking about potential control mechanisms that are honestly pretty unsettling.
Yeah, I can see how that would be worrying.
Stuff that makes China's social credit system look almost tame in comparison.
Really? Wow.
It's wild.
So I think a lot of people hear digital currency and they just think, oh, it's like a tech upgrade, like a new version of Pix or something.
Exactly.
But what Deputy Zanatta is saying is that DRX could be fundamentally different.
Okay.
And that's because it's a central bank digital currency, or a CBDC for short.
And so what does that mean exactly? What makes a CBDC different?
Well, with a CBDC, the government isn't just facilitating digital transactions like they do with something like Pix. They're in total control of the money itself.
So unlike Bitcoin, which is decentralized, DRX is totally centralized and controlled by the government.
Exactly.
And it's also programmable, which is where things get really interesting and potentially scary.
Yeah, that's a key point.
Can you break down what that actually means for someone who maybe hasn't spent much time thinking about crypto?
Sure. So imagine your money comes with this invisible rule book,
Okay.
and the government holds the pen and can write whatever rules they want into that rule book. They could decide how much you can spend,
Wow.
where you can spend it,
Okay.
even what specific things you can buy.
It's like they could just decide one day that cheese bread is off limits,
Exactly.
or that you've hit your weekly spending limit at the market and your DRX just won't work.
Exactly. They have that power.
And that's just scratching the surface, right?
Yeah, that's just one example. The potential for control goes way beyond that.
Now, Deputy Zanatta is drawing some pretty stark comparisons to China's social credit system.
Yes.
And we've all heard those stories about people being punished for things like jaywalking or posting something critical of the government online, right?
Right.
Is she saying that DRX could be used to track and rate Brazilians in a similar way?
Well, it's important to be precise here. She's not saying that DRX will be used that way,
Okay.
but rather that the potential for misuse is incredibly high.
So the risk is there even if the intention isn't necessarily malicious.
Exactly. We're talking about data privacy, the potential for discrimination, even political manipulation.
So it's like, let's say you make a donation to a political candidate the government doesn't like. Theoretically, they could then restrict your DRX,
Yep.
essentially cutting you off financially for expressing your beliefs.
That's the level of control we're talking about.
Wow.
It's pretty chilling when you think about it.
It's really chilling. So it sounds like this isn't just about whether you personally prefer using cash or an app to pay for things.
Right.
It's a much bigger question about whether the government should even have that much power over your spending in the first place.
Absolutely.
And this all gets even more complicated when you consider that Brazil already has Pix, which has become incredibly popular.
Hugely popular.
Yeah, I mean, when I was in Sao Paulo last year, everyone was using Pix.
Right.
So on the surface, it seems like people are already pretty comfortable going digital.
It does seem that way.
So what's the big deal with DRX then?
Well, Deputy Zanatta's argument is that there's a fundamental difference here. Choice.
Okay.
People chose to adopt Pix organically because it was convenient and efficient.
Right.
So it wasn't forced on them. With DRX, the government could essentially make physical cash obsolete,
Wow.
leaving citizens with no alternative but to use their system.
So even if DRX itself isn't necessarily bad, the way it's being rolled out eliminates any choice in the matter.
Exactly. It's about coercion versus choice.
She's also worried about the precedent this sets for government overreach. Could you talk about that a little bit more?
Sure. So she brings up this really interesting point about recent proposals to limit Pix transactions.
Oh, wow.
Even with Pix, which was initially praised for its freedom and flexibility, we're starting to see the government exert more control.
So if they're already tweaking PIX, even though it's been so successful,
Now,
what's to stop them from imposing even stricter limitations with DRX, a system they fully control?
exactly, it's a valid concern.
It's almost like they're testing the waters with PIX.
Right.
Seeing how much they can get away with before introducing DRX.
It's a strategy we've seen before with new technologies. Introduce something that seems beneficial and convenient. Get widespread adoption, and then slowly start tightening the rein.
Then by then, it's too late to push back.
Exactly.
That's why I think this deep dive is so important. We're sounding the alarm early, giving people the information they need to understand what's at stake
I agree.
before it's too late. So what concrete steps is Deputy Zanatta taking to prevent this from happening?
So she's introduced a bill which is making waves because it aims to protect the right to use physical currency.
So she's not just talking, she's trying to actually change the law.
Right.
What kind of impact could this bill have if it passes?
This bill would basically be saying you can't force people into a digital system they don't want. It would preserve the option to use cash,
Okay.
giving people the freedom to choose how they manage their finances.
And this is especially crucial for certain segments of the population, right?
Absolutely.
Like vulnerable populations, older folks, people in rural areas, or those without reliable internet access.
Exactly. We're talking about potentially millions of people who rely on cash for their daily transactions.
Right.
Forcing them onto a digital platform, especially one with the potential for surveillance and control, could be disastrous.
I mean, imagine someone in a remote village who relies on cash to buy groceries.
Right.
Suddenly, they need a smartphone and a stable internet connection just to buy food.
A major barrier.
It creates this two-tiered society.
Yeah.
Those who can access the digital economy and those who are left behind.
And that's a key part of Deputy Zanatta's argument.
Yeah,
Access to financial services shouldn't be a privilege.
right.
It should be a ruling.
And DRX especially, without really carefully considering all these potential downsides, could exacerbate the inequalities that already exist in Brazil.
Absolutely.
It's interesting because it seems like she's not anti-technology.
No, not at all.
It's not about rejecting progress.
Right.
It's about questioning what kind of progress we want
Exactly.
and making sure that it benefits everyone,
Yes.
not just a select few.
That's the key.
Yeah.
And that brings us to another really important point. Deputy Zanatta isn't just raising these concerns. She's calling for a wider public debate on DRX. She's saying, hey, this is a decision that will affect all of us, so let's talk about it openly and honestly.
Yeah.
She's not alone in this fight.
Okay.
We're seeing similar pushback against CBDCs in Canada, Colombia, even Australia.
Wow.
There's a growing global movement of people who are skeptical of giving governments this much power over their money.
It seems like there's this real fear that once this digital genie is out of the bottle, there's no going back.
That's definitely a concern that Deputy Zanatta brings up. And that's why Deputy Zanatta is calling for a much more cautious and transparent approach.
Okay.
She's arguing that the Brazilian government needs to thoroughly address these potential downsides before even considering implementing DRX.
So what's the alternative? I mean, is she advocating for just sticking with physical cash forever?
Not necessarily. She acknowledges the benefits of digital payment systems like PIX, which have revolutionized how people transact in Brazil.
Right.
But she's adamant that any transition to a digital currency needs to be driven by choice,
Okay.
not coercion.
It's about ensuring that people have options.
Exactly. That they're not forced into a system they don't trust or understand. Precisely. And it's about making sure that any new system benefits all Brazilians,
Right.
not just those who are already plugged into the digital economy. And she raises this crucial point about the supposed benefits of DRX. They often come with strings attached. Increased efficiency, for example, could mean increased surveillance and control.
It's like there's no such thing as a free lunch.
Exactly.
What about the argument that DRX could help combat corruption?
She's skeptical about that as well.
Yeah.
She points out that corruption is often a systemic issue,
You okay?
rooted in weak institutions and a lack of transparency.
Right.
Simply switching to a digital currency won't magically solve those problems, especially if the system isn't designed with really robust safeguards.
So it sounds like her message is don't just fall for the hype. Let's carefully examine the potential costs and benefits of DRX before making any hasty decisions.
And let's not forget the potential impact on Brazil's sovereignty.
Oh, that's interesting. How so?
Think about it with a CBDC. The government would essentially be handing over control of its monetary policy to a central authority.
Okay.
The central bank issuing the CBDC would have immense power to manipulate the economy, potentially favoring certain industries or individuals over others. This could have significant implications for Brazil's economic independence and its ability to chart its own course.
So this adds a whole other layer to this whole debate.
It does.
It's not just about individual freedom.
Right.
It's about national sovereignty as well.
Exactly. And that's why Deputy Zanatta is urging Brazilians to wake up and pay attention.
Okay. And she's calling for popular mobilization, right?
She is.
What specific actions does she want people to take?
She's urging people to contact their elected officials, share their concerns, and demand transparency and accountability from the government.
Okay.
She believes that through collective action, it's still possible to shape a future where financial freedom and national sovereignty are protected.
It's a good reminder that we're not powerless in the face of all these technological advancements.
No, we're not.
We have a voice and we need to use it.
Exactly. And that brings us back to this key question. What does financial freedom actually mean to you?
Right.
Are you willing to sacrifice some level of control and privacy for the supposed convenience and efficiency of a digital currency? Or do you believe that certain freedoms are non-negotiable, even in the face of all this technological progress?
These are big questions.
Yeah.
And they're not easy to answer.
No, they're not.
But the questions that we all need to be grappling with
I agree.
as we navigate this rapidly evolving technological landscape.
And that's exactly what Deputy Zanatta is hoping to achieve with this interview.
Yeah.
She's not just presenting her own perspective.
Okay.
She's inviting us all to join the conversation, to think critically, and to make informed decisions about the future we want to create.
Well, she's certainly given us a lot to think about.
She has. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I think it's important to step back and consider the broader implications of what's happening in Brazil.
Okay.
This isn't just a local issue.
Right.
It's part of a global trend towards digital currency. And the questions it raises are relevant to all of us.
So what can our listeners, many of whom might not be in Brazil, take away from this discussion?
I think the most important takeaway is that we need to be vigilant. We need to pay attention to how these technologies are being developed and implemented. And we need to make sure that our voices are heard.
Don't just assume that progress is always a good thing. Sometimes we need to take a step back and ask ourselves, what are we gaining?
Right.
And what are we giving up in the process?
Exactly. And let's not forget the power of individual action. Even small steps like contacting your elected officials, sharing your concerns on social media,
Okay.
or supporting organizations that are fighting for digital rights can make a difference.
It's about being informed, engaged, and empowered to shape the future we want.
Exactly.
One thing that really struck me from this interview is how Deputy Zanatta connects this whole DRX situation to a much bigger picture.
Yeah.
It's not just about Brazil. It's about a global power shift, with governments potentially having more and more control over our lives
Right.
through our finances.
It's a really interesting point. And one of the things that really got me thinking was when she said, if the future means control, I prefer to live in the past. Pretty powerful statement. Are we just blindly accepting all this so-called progress without really considering what we might be giving up in return?
It's so easy to get caught up in the convenience, the supposed efficiency.
Exactly.
But as we've been discussing, there's a potential dark side to all of this.
There is.
Yeah.
And I think what's so admirable about Deputy Zanatta is that she's not just sitting back and complaining about it.
Right.
She's actually out there fighting back.
Yeah.
Introducing legislation, raising public awareness, building alliances with people you wouldn't expect.
She's reminding us that we have a voice, that we're not just powerless bystanders.
Right.
We can actually shape the future we want.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not predetermined.
No, it's being decided right now. And our choices, our actions, they matter. They do. And one thing that really stuck with me was her emphasis on choice. She's not saying that digital currencies are inherently bad or evil,
Okay.
but she's fighting for the right to opt out, to choose how you want to manage your own finances.
Which seems like a pretty fundamental freedom.
It does, doesn't it?
And it makes you wonder, where do we draw the line? If we give up control over our money, what's next? The other freedoms might be at risk.
It's a slippery slope. And these are questions we all need to be asking ourselves, not just in the context of digital currencies, but with all these new technologies that are emerging.
Yeah.
Technology is evolving at an incredible pace,
It is.
and it's impacting every aspect of our lives.
Right.
We need to be having these conversations now before it's too late.
So what can our listeners do? Many of them aren't in Brazil, so how can they make a difference in this global shift towards digital currencies?
Well, I think it starts with awareness. Read about these issues, follow the news, understand how these technologies work and what the potential implications are.
Ray.
Knowledge is power, as they say.
Absolutely. And don't underestimate the power of just having conversations about this stuff.
Yeah.
Talk to your friends, your family, your colleagues, share your concerns, ask questions, challenge assumptions. The more people who are aware of these issues, the more pressure we can put on our leaders to make responsible decisions.
And don't be afraid to get involved. Support organizations that are fighting for digital rights. Contact your elected officials. Make your voice heard. Even small actions can make a difference.
Well, I think this deep dive has been a real eye-opener, and we've covered a lot of ground. We've explored the potential risks and benefits of DRX, delved into the concerns raised by Deputies Zanatta, and examined the global implications of this shift towards digital currencies.
It's been a really thought-provoking conversation.
But now it's up to you, our listener, to decide what you're going to do with this information. Are you going to be a passive observer, or are you going to step up and be part of the solution? What does financial freedom mean to you, and what are you willing to do to protect it? We hope this deep dive has empowered you to think critically, ask tough questions, and engage in meaningful conversations about the future we want to create. Thanks for joining us on this journey. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep the conversation going.